Imagine this. You've just landed in an unforgiving northern wilderness. No concrete, no steel, no machines, no electricity, and winter is coming. You've got one task: build a home that will keep your family warm, dry, and alive. A home that won't collapse under snow. A home that can face storms, raiders, wolves, and time itself. For the Vikings, this wasn't a DIY project. It was life or death. And yet, without modern tools or technology, they didn't just survive. They thrived. They built homes so clever, so rugged, and so well adapted to their brutal environments that traces of them still survive 1,000 years later. No blueprints, no nails, no insulation, just raw brainpower, timber, mud, and the knowledge passed from generation to generation. This is not the Viking architecture Hollywood shows you. No dragon-carved mead halls in the middle of battle scenes. This is the real Viking home, smart, sustainable, and built from nothing. Part 1. Before the first log. The land chose the home. Most people think building begins with tools, but the Vikings knew it began with the land. Where you built was everything. And if you chose wrong, your home could flood, freeze, rot, or starve you. So before a single tree was felled, Viking families did something modern builders often ignore. They listened to the land. Site selection, ancient wisdom with no blueprints. The Vikings would spend days, even weeks, walking potential sites. They looked for natural elevation to avoid floods and waterlogging, proximity to fresh water for drinking, cooking, and animals, shelter from the wind using trees, hills, or outcroppings, southern exposure to soak up as much daylight and warmth as possible. This wasn't guesswork. This was survival science, handed down orally from father to son, mother to daughter. A well-chosen site could mean less firewood burned in winter, less risk of disease, and stronger structures that needed fewer repairs. The orientation hack, turning the house into a heat trap. The Vikings knew how to position their homes to trap heat. The long axis of the house was usually aligned east-west, so the broad side faced south, catching the maximum daylight during long Nordic winters. Doors often faced away from prevailing winds. No dramatic front entrance, just a smart, minimal opening to conserve warmth. Some homes were even partially sunk into the ground, using the Earth's natural insulation to keep temperatures more stable. Gathering materials, a builder's supply chain, Viking style. Once the site was chosen, it was time to gather what the land offered. And this is where Viking ingenuity really shines. With no trucks, no forklifts, and no metal nails, everything had to be local, durable, and movable by hand or sled. Key materials included timber, birch, pine, and oak used for walls, roofs, and beams. Turf, thick sod blocks used for roofing and insulation. Stone, for foundation, fire pits, and structural weight. Moss and clay, used to seal gaps between logs and stop drafts. Animal dung, yes, mixed with clay to create a surprisingly effective wall plaster. Every log was chopped, hauled, and shaped by hand, often with tools made of iron the Vikings forged themselves. And there was zero waste. Even bark and branches were saved for fire, rope, or thatching. Recycled homes, nothing was thrown away. Vikings didn't knock down old buildings when they moved. They took them apart, carried what they could, and rebuilt. Archaeologists have found reused timbers in newer homes complete with old notches, burn marks, and tool scars. This means every home wasn't just shelter. It was a record of a family's journey patched together from other lifetimes. A culture of builders. Every Viking was a craftsman. Here's the key difference from today. Vikings didn't hire contractors. Building wasn't a job. It was a rite of passage. Fathers taught sons how to square a beam. Women taught daughters how to pack moss into a wall to block the wind. Neighbors helped neighbors because your life literally depended on the strength of each other's walls. And over time, what they created were homes that required almost no imported materials, could be repaired without tools beyond an axe and a knife, and often stood for generations. Viking home building didn't begin with cutting wood. It began with reading the earth, understanding the seasons, and thinking years ahead. Because when you build with nothing, every choice matters. Part 2. Inside the Viking home architecture without tools, comfort without luxury. Step inside a Viking longhouse and you'll immediately feel it. Not the chill of the outside world, but the heat of the hearth, the thickness of the walls, and a quiet ingenuity in every corner. These homes weren't just huts. They were multi-purpose machines built for survival. Homes, workshops, kitchens, hospitals, stables, all rolled into one structure designed to face the worst of northern nature. So how did the Vikings do it without nails, insulation, or engineered lumber? Let's look at the secrets inside the Viking home. Timber framework, the post and wattle skeleton. The backbone of every Viking house was the timber frame. Most commonly, they used a technique called post and wattle. Load-bearing posts were buried deep in the ground. Horizontal beams created a strong skeleton. Wattle, a lattice of interwoven sticks or branches, was placed between the beams. The entire wall was then coated in daub, a mixture of clay, straw, animal hair, moss, and manure, to seal it tight. No screws, no metal fasteners, just smart joinery and layered natural materials. This frame flexed with the wind instead of snapping. It breathed, allowing moisture to pass through without rot. And it stood for decades, even centuries. Turf roofs, green engineering before it was cool. One of the most brilliant Viking innovations wasn't even visible from the ground. The turf roof, an entire living layer of soil and grass on top of the house. Why? Because turf offered insulation. Thick sod helped trap warmth during the endless winter nights. Waterproofing. Properly layered turf could shed water as well as modern shingles. Camouflage. A green roof made homes harder to spot from a distance, crucial in raiding times. Structural weight. The turf helped compress the walls, making the entire building tighter and sturdier. And best of all, it was free. You just needed a spade, patience, and a few extra pairs of hands. Some homes even had multi-layered turf, with birch bark underneath as a natural water barrier. It was messy, heavy, and manual, but it worked. Earth for walls, warm in winter, cool in summer. In some areas, especially in Iceland, Norway, and parts of Scotland, the Vikings used sod blocks, actual chunks of grass and soil stacked like bricks, to make walls. These sod homes were highly insulated, quiet, nearly invisible in the landscape, and despite looking primitive, they had serious engineering advantages. Thermal mass, they stored heat from the hearth and released it slowly. Low maintenance, just patch with more dirt. Repairable with bare hands. Modern builders now call this eco-building. The Vikings just called it home. Hearth hacks, heat without a chimney. The heart of every Viking home was the central hearth, a stone-lined fire pit in the middle of the floor. No chimney, no metal flue, just smoke rising through a hole in the roof. But the design was intentional. The low ceiling trapped heat. The roof hole let smoke out slowly, often creating a smoky upper layer that kept insects away and helped preserve food and wooden beams. The firelight acted as the only illumination during long winter nights. And the embers stayed hot even after flames died, warming the house for hours. Everyone ate, slept, and repaired gear around the fire. It was the social and spiritual center of the home, sacred, practical, and utterly essential. Sleeping hacks, raised platforms, and shared heat. Beds were built as raised wooden platforms along the walls. Why? Elevation avoided the cold draft that settled on the floor. Straw mattresses stuffed with moss or animal hair trapped heat. Furs, not blankets, served as insulation. Entire families often slept in the same room, sometimes even the same bed sharing body heat during frigid nights. And there's a little-known fact. Animals were often kept in the same building, sometimes behind a wall, sometimes under the same roof, adding warmth and manure to the living space. Doors, windows, and the art of limiting exposure. There was usually only one door, small, narrow, and low to the ground. Why? Because every time you open a door in winter, you bleed heat. The Vikings minimized openings to trap warmth and prevent drafts. Windows, if they existed, were tiny slits sometimes covered with bladders, horn, or thin animal membrane instead of glass. It wasn't about comfort. It was about not dying in a blizzard. Joints, not nails, the secret of Viking carpentry. One of the most overlooked Viking innovations? Their use of joinery over nails. Mortise-and-tenon joints. Dovetails. Wooden pegs and dowels. These techniques created structures that could expand and contract with the seasons without cracking. And if something broke, it could be repaired with just a knife and wood from nearby trees. Modern timber framers still study Viking joinery. And when archaeologists excavate longhouses today, it's these joints, not nails, that have survived intact. The inside of a Viking house wasn't luxurious. It was smoky, cramped, dark, sometimes damp, but it was ingenious. Every board had a purpose. Every material was local. Every design choice was tested by generations of survival. In a time without architects or blueprints, the Vikings built homes that were efficient, durable, repairable, and completely in tune with nature. They didn't waste, they didn't overbuild, and they didn't need machines to create comfort, just skill, adaptation, and time. Part 3. Built by the tribe, communal power behind every Viking home. A Viking home wasn't built alone. Behind every longhouse, there was a community, a bond, and a shared responsibility stronger than stone. Because for Vikings, building a house wasn't just a task. It was a rite of passage, a show of loyalty, and a declaration that you belonged. And these homes, impressive as they were as much a product of the Viking spirit as Viking tools. The dugnad spirit no one builds alone. The Norse had a word for it. Dugnad, a deeply rooted cultural concept that meant everyone pitches in for the good of all. Dugnad wasn't charity, it was duty. When a longhouse needed to be raised, the entire village came together. Neighbors, extended family, even children helped gather materials, raise frames, mix mud, and lay turf. Meals were shared, songs were sung, and bonds were forged through sweat. You helped your neighbor today, they helped you tomorrow. Miss a dugnad, and you risked being ostracized, cut off from the support network that meant survival in the Norse world. This wasn't just building, it was belonging. A social map written in wood and mud. The layout of Viking homes and villages told you everything about who you were dealing with. Wealthy jarls? Their longhouses were wide and lined with carved beams, commoners or thralls. Smaller turf huts or earth-walled homes with fewer comforts. But no matter the size, every Viking home was part of a greater structure. Homes were often aligned with the wind and sunlight for maximum efficiency. They clustered near water sources, arable land, or trade routes. Shared fences divided livestock. Storage barns and workshops were communal in smaller settlements. In Iceland and other colonized areas, entire valleys were mapped out with a few core longhouses and smaller turf huts branching off, all interlinked by kinship and cooperation. Hearths as community beacons. In Viking society, the hearth wasn't just the heart of the home, it was the heart of the people. During construction, the laying of the hearth was often done with ritual care, as if placing the soul of the home. People gathered around hearths not just for heat, but for judgments, storytelling, feasts and alliances, religious rites to household gods and ancestors. Some sagas even describe oaths being sworn at the hearth, because to betray your word near a sacred flame was to risk divine punishment. That fire was your witness. It remembered. Timber teams and craft guilds, without the name. Contrary to the Hollywood image of rugged loners, the Vikings were collaborative craftspeople. Though they didn't have formal guilds like in medieval Europe, Viking societies had specialized roles. Carpenters, smidir, who knew exactly how to select and hew timber. Thatchers who could lay watertight turf roofs in a day. Blacksmiths who fashioned tools and hinges from salvaged iron. Rope makers and weavers who produced crucial ties and seals. Building a house wasn't improvised, it was executed by a network of people who'd learned their roles from youth. If you grew up Viking, you didn't need a blueprint. You had tradition, muscle memory, and the hands of your clan at your back. Sharing space with spirits. A sacred build. For the Vikings, the world was alive with spirits, land spirits, ancestors, house gods. Before construction, a blot, ritual sacrifice, was often performed to ask permission from the land itself. There are historical records and sagas describing animal sacrifices buried under corner posts, tiny figurines of Thor or Freyr placed in walls for protection, ashes of ancestors mixed into hearthstones. Building a house wasn't just about shelter, it was binding yourself to the land and asking it to protect you in return. Protection and defense. More than just a roof. Some Viking homes weren't just for weather, they were for war. On frontier settlements, especially in places like Scotland, Ireland, or Iceland, Viking builders added earthen ramparts or stone perimeters, narrow defensible entrances, homes partially sunken into the ground to lower visibility, hidden storage pits beneath floors for valuables or food. When raiders came, or worse, rival Viking bands, these homes could hold firm or serve as bases for retaliation. Even homes in peaceful areas often kept spears, axes, and shields within arm's reach, not for hunting, but for defense. A Viking home didn't rise because one man swung an axe. It stood because an entire people believed in the strength of the group. It wasn't about wealth, it wasn't about comfort, it was about survival through solidarity and knowing that every beam, every sawed brick, and every smear of clay meant something. It meant you weren't alone. Part 4. Nature was their toolbox. The hidden hacks that made Viking homes last centuries. It's easy to assume Viking homes were primitive. After all, they didn't have concrete, nails, or blueprints, but look closer and you'll discover something incredible. They engineered solutions modern builders still admire. Using only what nature gave them, they created homes that could stand for centuries, weathered brutal storms, and remain cool in summer, warm in winter, and bone dry through relentless rains. These were not crude huts. They were masterpieces of environmental design created by instinct, passed down through oral tradition, and proven over time. Sun, wind, and water. Viking passive design. The placement of a Viking longhouse wasn't random, it was strategic. Homes were oriented to take full advantage of sunlight and wind flow. Doors often faced southeast, allowing early morning sun to heat the interior. Backs of homes faced prevailing winds, blocking cold air from entering. Earthen banks or tree lines were used as natural windbreaks. Windows, if any, were tiny slits, sometimes with animal bladder or horn panes enough for light, but not for cold. These weren't just homes, they were living tools, adapted to the terrain. Even in the far north, Viking families used the land's natural slopes to drain water, angle rooftops, and deflect snowdrifts. Turf roofs. A living, breathing shield. One of the most brilliant features of Viking architecture was the turf roof. A turf roof might sound like a leaky patch of weeds, but in truth it was a thermal shield, a camouflage layer, and even a garden. Viking builders cut thick slabs of sod with grass still attached, laid them over a birch bark waterproofing membrane, secured it all with a layer of rocks or timber beams. These roofs were fire resistant, insulating, keeping warmth in and cold out. Long-lasting, often surviving 60 to 100 years if well maintained. Even better, the roots of the grass wove the slabs together, forming a natural mesh that resisted wind shear. In fact, the best turf roofs didn't need repair, they grew stronger with age. Drainage like clockwork. Vikings knew that standing water was the enemy of every structure. Moisture meant rot, and rot meant death in the cold. So how did they solve this? With ingenious earthwork and subtle grading. The floors inside longhouses were gently sloped so any moisture flowed to the door. Homes were slightly elevated using stone foundations or wooden piles. In Iceland and Greenland, volcanic gravel or lava rock was used beneath floors to help with drainage. Outside, drainage ditches were dug around the house to guide rainfall away, often connected to livestock enclosures. Even the ancient Norse laws of Iceland mention legal penalties for not properly draining water from one's property. That's how serious they were about it. Stone, clay, and bone building with everything. Vikings didn't waste anything. Every part of an animal, a tree, or even a shipwreck had a second life. Bones and antlers were sometimes used for pegs, hinges, or wall pins. Clay mixed with straw and animal hair was used to plaster and seal interior walls, forming a breathable but insulating barrier. Stones were packed tightly at the base of outer walls for drainage or used as corner anchors. Ship planks and wrecked timber were reused to reinforce beams or walls in coastal villages. In Greenland, where trees were scarce, homes were built almost entirely from stone, turf, and seal bone, yet still retained heat impressively well. In the Arctic Circle, ingenuity wasn't optional. It was everything. Fiber technology ropes, sinews, and woven walls. One forgotten element of Viking architecture was their use of fiber-based engineering. Ropes made from twisted animal sinew or horsehair were used to bind beams, especially in turf houses where nails couldn't reach. Wattle-and-daub walls made from woven willow or hazel branches covered in mud and straw were used as interior partitions. Viking builders even wove insulation mats from dried reeds or wool scraps to stuff between ceiling beams. These elements were lightweight, reusable, and flexible, meaning they absorbed shock during storms or minor quakes. They made Viking homes flexible but firm, like a ship in rough seas. Door latches, hinges, and security tricks. Though not often shown in museums, Vikings had clever ways of securing their homes. Doors were usually inset and reinforced with crossbars, making them harder to break through. Sliding latches were made from carved wood, sometimes requiring a hidden trick to open. Iron hinges, when available, were carefully reused across generations. Some longhouses had wolf traps pits near entrances covered by branches, useful for keeping out both predators and thieves. And remember, Viking homes weren't designed for isolation. If one house was under threat, a horn blew and the whole village responded. Their homes weren't just designed to keep people in, they were designed to let help in fast. Designs that survived for 1,000 years. The proof of Viking architectural genius is simple. Many of their building principles are still used today. In Iceland, Norway, and the Faroe Islands, you'll still find turf roof homes, sun-oriented doorways, sloped drainage systems, communal building methods that echo the old dugnad. Some homes built in the Viking Age have left foundations and frameworks still intact, even after 1,000 years of frost, flood, and fire. And none of it was done with blueprints, computers, or cranes. Just hands, instinct, and the memory of generations. Viking homes weren't built to impress. They were built to endure. Built to bend with the wind, drink the rain, and stand through the silence of winter. And the best part? They built them all, without a single modern tool. Part 5. The lost legacy of Viking craftsmanship and why it still matters today. 1,000 years have passed since the last Viking hammer rang out across the fjords. Their longhouses have slumped into the earth. Their tools lie buried beneath peat and moss. But their wisdom still endures. In a time before blueprints, building codes, or machines, they created homes that sheltered entire bloodlines, withstood centuries of harsh winters, and embodied a kind of rugged human genius we've nearly forgotten. Viking ingenuity versus modern convenience. Think about what it meant to build a home then. No nails, no power tools, no measuring tapes, no second chances. You had to read the land, feel the wind, and know the wood before you struck it. Building a home wasn't just construction, it was survival, legacy, and ritual. Today, we build with speed. The Vikings built for centuries. And strangely enough, the more we study their homes, the more we realize. Their insulation was better than many modern houses. Their passive solar design reduced heating needs naturally. Their structures required fewer repairs over time. Their materials were 100% sustainable, and they did it all without electricity, just by listening to the land. The full circle moment. Why Viking design is coming back. Across Scandinavia, a quiet movement is unfolding. Architects are returning to Viking building principles. Turf roofs are being revived for their eco-friendly cooling and insulation. Earth-sheltered homes are being designed to mimic longhouses. Timber framing without metal fasteners is once again seen as a mark of craftsmanship. And beyond the north, these lessons are rippling outward. In Alaska, Canada, and Iceland, passive heating designs inspired by Viking homes are helping remote villages thrive off-grid. In Denmark, the concept of hygge, cozy communal living echoes the Viking fire-lit halls. Even in green architecture circles, the term Viking resilience is gaining traction. Why? Because the Vikings didn't just survive, they thrived in nature, not in spite of it. From myth to blueprint, what we've misunderstood. Hollywood would have us believe the Vikings were just raiders, violent, filthy, chaotic. But when you step inside the ruins of a Viking home, you discover something else. Precision, planning, beauty born from necessity. These homes weren't thrown together. They were orchestrated from the smoke holes and timber pegs to the slope of the thatch. Viking builders weren't brutes swinging axes blindly. They were artisans, masters of their materials, tuned to their climate, guided by ancestral memory. And that's the truth most history books miss. A fire that still burns. Maybe the real lesson here isn't about wood or turf or roof pitch. Maybe it's this. In an age where we're drowning in tools and still building homes that fall apart in 20 years. The Vikings built with nothing and created homes that lasted generations. And they did it with a deep respect for nature, a sense of shared labor, and a kind of craftsmanship that today feels almost mythical. The longhouses may be gone, the fires have long gone cold, but the knowledge still lingers. In the earth, in the wood, and in the hands of those willing to build with purpose again. Because long before modern tools and modern codes, the Vikings proved that with enough grit, wisdom, and care, you can build a home that outlasts an empire.